Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video, we're going to learn the 1 to 6 player game, The Art Project, designed by Florian Sirieix and Benoit Turpin, and published by the Op in partnership with Lumberjack Studios, who helped sponsor this video. You're a member of the art rescue team, tasked with retrieving precious works of art that have been stolen from all around the globe by the White Hand Corporation and its nefarious agents. They're on the move, so there's no time to waste. Join me at the table, and let's learn how to play. To set up, pick one of the 6 maps, which are spread across the 3 included double-sided boards. And each has slightly different rules, but for your first game, they recommend starting with the Japan map, as we'll do here. The others we'll discuss briefly at the end of this video, returning them to the box for now. Beside the board, create a supply of these health, art piece boxes, White Hand agent tokens, black dice, and the 3 Lost City markers. You'll find 3 other Lost City markers that have blue shading on them, but these are only used in the Polynesia map, so we'll leave them in the box. The board has several hexagon spaces representing cities, and in each one you set 2 agent pawns. Nearby, put this van board, adding 3 of these fuel, gun, and walkie-talkie tokens to each of the 3 areas for them. You'll have 3 extra of each type, and these you'll put into a general supply. Now find the mission cards. Their backs have different combinations of symbols in this area, but you shuffle these with their backs and those symbols face up. Then you deal 12 into a pile near the board. I'm going to lose track of how many I've dealt because I'm talking at the same time. We'll assume that's 12, and then you put this end tile on top, setting the rest of the stack on top of that. Each player now picks one of the 6 included characters, its pawn, and matching colored die. In this video, we'll assume that we have 2 players taking blue and yellow, and return the others to the box. Have each player collect 3 health tokens from the supply to set on top of their character, and then they each place their pawn on the starting space of the board, which is marked with a red flag. Giving each player 3 hearts is known as playing at the moderate difficulty level. Giving each player more or fewer hearts is how you play at the game's different difficulty levels, and you can attempt to fill in this Hall of Fame record in the rulebook by playing and beating each map at each of the different difficulty levels. Moderate is a good place to start, though. And that's the setup. In the art project, you and the other players will be working together to reclaim stolen works of art that were taken by the international ring of thieves known as the White Hand. The stolen art is represented by these boxes, and as you reclaim them, they'll be added to this track. Fill the track before the game is over, and you've reclaimed all the stolen artwork and win. There are a few different ways the game can end, which we'll learn about later, but if the game ends before you reclaim all of the artwork, the players lose. The game is played over a series of rounds, and each round is divided into 4 phases, starting with the mission phase. The game comes with a player reference that will walk you through the different phases of the game, and as it describes here, during the mission phase, each player draws 2 cards from the top of the mission deck. Now, as we saw during the setup, there are visible symbols on the backs of these cards, and we'll explain their purpose later. When drawing the 2 cards, players can collect them in any order, but you must take your 2 cards one right after the other. So the player here might draw first, taking their 2 cards, and then I'd take 2. During the next round's mission phase, I might draw my 2 cards first. You decide the order each round. Either way, every player now secretly examines their own cards. During this mission phase of the game, each player will take a turn picking and playing a single mission card from their hand, discarding the other one. But turns can be taken in any order. The cards have a variety of effects, which we'll discuss in a moment, but the key thing to be aware of right now is that within a card, you will often find both positive and negative effects. Although you can't show players your cards, you can discuss all aspects of them so that together you can work out a plan for the order players should take their turns in. For example, I might say out loud that I have a card that I want to play, but it will cause us to lose a bunch of fuel. So if someone can go before me and help us collect some fuel first, that might be best. The decisions you make about the turn order and which cards you'll play aren't final, but these discussions will help you roughly decide the order you want to take turns in. For example, if we decide I'll play first, after I reveal my card and resolve it, even if my partner had planned to play this card from their hand, they could then decide to play the other one. Or if we had a third player who was intending to go last, they could jump in here and suggest going next. Collaborating and planning is both encouraged and helpful, but you can still be flexible. Also, during this phase, any player, at any time, can spend one or more resources drawing an extra mission card for each. The resources are fuel, guns, and walkie-talkies. When you spend resources, they come from the van and are sent to the general supply here. These can be spent by any player, so if I wanted to draw 2 extra mission cards, I'd spend any 2 resources and then draw them from the top of the deck. Anytime during the game when you want or need to spend resources, but have run out of the required type in the van, you can spend your own health tokens, sending them back to the supply, in place of those required resources. This is known in the game as the golden rule. So if there were no resources here and I wanted to draw a card, I could spend a health and draw 1, or I could spend 2 and draw 2. Just be aware, if a player's character loses all its health tokens, it dies, the game ends, and the players all lose. And be aware, you can never spend health in place of resources if you have the required resources that could be spent instead. Okay, with that understood, once players have decided who will go first, that player reveals the card they've chosen to play. That card must be fully resolved, and every other card they had in their hand is added to a shared face-up discard pile. Cards are divided into 4 sections which must be resolved in order from top to bottom. Some will have areas that are blank, like this card's red section here, and in that case, you'll skip those related sections. Let's assume we're resolving this card. The top section indicates the resources that must now be spent, a single gun in this case. Again, spent resources must come from the van and are added to the general supply. But remember, if you don't have the required resources, let's say we played this card and the van didn't have any guns in it. All of them were already in the general supply. Then, the golden rule lets you spend health tokens instead. But you have to spend your own. Another player can't offer to spend health tokens from their character when you're resolving effects from a card you just played. Sometimes the top effect requires spending health, and this must come from the player who played the card. And you can't spend a resource instead. The golden rule only lets you spend health in place of resources, not resources in place of health. Going back to the original card we were looking at, with the top section of a card resolved, in this case spending a gun resource, the second section causes you to place a white hand agent token on each space of the board, showing the related artwork symbols found in that second section. The various symbols represent different types of artwork as shown in the rulebook and here on screen. And each hexagon space will show one of these different types of symbols. So resolving this section would add a white hand agent here and another one to this space. Sometimes this section of the card will show repeating symbols. In a case like this, that would cause us to add 2 agents to this space. And there's no limit to how many agents can be in a space. If you would ever need to add agents to the board and there are none left in the supply, the game ends and the players all lose. So we'll want to be moving agents from the board back to the supply so they don't run out, and we'll learn how to do that a little later. In this third section, you'll find the resources or health tokens you now get to collect. Here, 1 fuel and 1 walkie-talkie. So I'd move 1 of each from the supply to the van. When you gain resources, you don't gain them. They're added to the van so that all players have access to them. And resources are limited. Any you would earn when there are none left in the supply are simply ignored. Sometimes this section of the card will show hearts. Anytime you gain hearts, you take them from the supply and add them to a character. But here's the twist. You can add them to your character or any players and divide them as you like. So I might take 1 for myself and give another to another player, but I could have taken both for myself or given both to the other player. There's no limit to how many hearts each character can have. Even though we each started with 3, our characters could end up with 4 or 10 or any number. Well, not any number, because you are limited to how many are in the supply. So once the hearts in the supply run out, you can't gain any more. This brings us to the 4th and final section of the card, which will show 1 or more symbols known as clues, which are the same as the ones shown on the back of the card here at the top. To resolve this section, flip the card over face down by the board, which turns it into a clue card. As more are resolved and added here, overlap them so the clues remain visible, forming what is known as the clue track. Now, if there is ever 3 or more identical clue symbols anywhere within the track, like we see here with these film symbols, then you've discovered an art piece. Immediately pause the game and discard cards with the 3 matching symbols and collect an art piece token from the supply, adding it to the space of the board that matches the symbol of the set that was discarded. Art tokens on the board can be collected later, and as we'll see, that will help you win the game. Each space of the board can contain, at most, 1 art piece token. But you must always discard any matching sets of 3 or more symbols in the clue track that you have, even if their matching space can't accept another token because one is already there. For example, if our clue track ended up with these 3 film symbols, we'd have to discard the related cards. But since the matching space already has an art piece here, nothing new gets added to it. In this way, we've kind of wasted that set of cards. It is possible to create more than one set of 3 matching symbols in a single turn, but each set must be discarded one at a time. For example, adding this has given us a set of 3 book symbols and 3 artifact symbols. We now pick which set to trade in first. Let's choose artifacts, discarding these 2 cards and placing an art piece in the space showing the artifact symbol. Now this means we no longer have a completed book set, so there's nothing more to trade in at this time. And that's how you resolve a mission card you've played. And remember, after playing a mission, any other cards you were holding must be discarded. And then players decide who will take the next turn. And turns will continue like this until every player has played a single card and discarded any others they were holding. Then it's time for the movement phase. Here, players will work together to decide which players, if any, want to move. And again, there's no specific player order. Perform this step in the order you choose. A player doesn't have to move, but if they decide to, for each fuel token spent, they move from the space they are in to a connected space following the dashed lines. And I can keep moving, spending 1 fuel each time I do. If you run out of fuel, don't forget the golden rule. You can always spend hearts in place of a resource that's run out. Once every player has moved that wants to, all art piece tokens in a city with a player pawn and no white hand agents are collected from the board and added to the lowest valued red space of this art piece track. So let me set up some examples to explain. This art piece is in a space with a player, but there are white hand agents here, so it's not collected. Over here we have a space with no white hand agents and an art piece, but there's no player here, so this artwork isn't collected. Now this space has a player and an art piece and no agents, so it would move to the track. If you ever add an art piece so it fills in the last space of this track, congratulations, you win. But let's not get ahead of ourselves because we still have more rules to learn. Before we move on to the next phase of a round, I want to explain an action players can agree to perform between any of the phases. And that action is called gaining allies. Allies will be especially useful in the next phase. To gain allies, you have to spend a certain number of walkie-talkie tokens. If you look at the value in the black shield of the lowest valued visible red space, you'll find the cost to acquire allies, 6 in a case like this. But once we've rescued an art piece, it would cover this space and now allies would only cost 5, and so on. Whatever the current cost, you now spend that number of walkie-talkies from the van. We'll assume the cost is currently 6, moving that number of walkie-talkies to the general supply. Now, we only have 4 here, but remember the golden rule. If you run out of a resource, you can spend hearts from your character to pay the remaining cost. And this is one action where any number of players can contribute hearts, since acquiring allies isn't an action taken by one player, but a decision made by the group. So we'll say these players decide to share the remaining cost of 2 walkie-talkies by spending a heart each. With the cost paid, you move a single black ally die from the supply to this space of the board. Allies in this area are unlocked and available for use for the rest of the game. And you can buy more than one ally at a time if you can pay the full cost for each. Okay, with that understood, it's time to discuss the next phase of the round, fighting. Here you check for any space with both player pawns and agents. These are spaces where a fight can happen, but you can choose not to fight in some or all of those spaces if you don't want to. And once again, the players decide together what order any fight should be resolved in, one fight at a time. In a city where you decide to fight, first check to see if there's more than one player there. Let's say this is the situation we have. If there is more than one player, you must pick one of them to be the leader. Both players will participate in the fight at that location, but it's the leader who will suffer the outcome if the fight fails. You can't fight more than once in the same location during the same round. So after we resolve a fight here, let's say with blue as the leader, we couldn't after resolve a fight here again during this round with yellow as the leader. If you only have one player in a location with the enemy, that player is the leader by default. Either way, the leader and any other player at that location will roll the die in their color. The leader also rolls all of the ally dice in this unlocked ally area, and let's assume we have 2 of them. And let's also assume these are the rolled results. After the dice are rolled, total their results and compare it against the strength of the agents at that location. Their strength equals the number of agents at that location, 2 in this case, plus the lowest visible value inside of a red box on this track, so 10. You also add to this the total number of white hand agents on this space, and we'll see how they can end up here later, but let's assume, for now, that we do have 2 of those agents here. So that's 2 plus 10 plus 2 for a total strength of 14. If the player's total fighting strength is equal to or higher than the total agent strength, the players win the fight. Winning returns all the white hand agent pieces at that location back to their supply. And if there happens to be an art piece at this location, it is immediately collected. Now remember, this means it's moved to the lowest valued space of this track. And notice, this also means that the total strength of the agents will now be higher for future fights that get resolved. So keep this in mind when you're deciding what order to resolve fights in. If, on the other hand, the player's total strength is less than the agent's total strength, you have some choices to make. You can discard any clue card from the track here to re-roll as many dice as the number of clue symbols it has. So if we discarded this card, we'd be able to re-roll 2 dice simultaneously. But we can choose to re-roll just 1 die using this card, but if so, we don't get to use the other symbol to re-roll after. Let's say we chose to re-roll these dice and we got this result. After re-rolling, we could discard another card to be able to re-roll again, either the same or different dice. Another option is to spend gun tokens. For each you remove from the van, you add 2 to your total strength in the fight. And if you run out of gun tokens, any players in the fight can use the golden rule to spend their health tokens as guns. And you can resolve these options in any order as often as you like, discarding to re-roll dice and spending guns. Now, whether you re-roll or use guns, or both, you may still be forced to admit defeat if you can't create a strength that equals or exceeds the enemy's. And you can always just admit defeat before re-rolling or using guns if you want to. If this happens, you've failed the fight, and the player who was the leader must lose 1 health, returning it to the supply. After you've resolved all the fights you wish to, it's time for the final phase of the round, known as the end of the round phase. Here, you check the board, and any city space that has 5 or more white hand agents in it is considered lost. The agents have permanently taken over, and you return them back to the supply and put one of these lost city markers in their place. From now on, any time an effect would require you to add a white hand agent to a lost city, you instead add it to this white hand space of the threat track here. As we saw, this will permanently be added to the total agent strength in all future fights. Also, if you gain a set of 3 clue symbols that would place an art piece in a lost city, that art piece is not placed, but you still have to trade in that set of cards. And finally, you cannot move into or through a lost city. If you happen to be in a city that becomes lost, then during the next movement phase, you must move out of that city to a connected city that isn't lost. Now, if you can't, because every connected city is lost already, then the players all lose. You also lose if you would need to place a lost marker on the board and there are none left in the supply. And there are only 3 of these, so you can't let 4 cities become lost. And those are all the phases of a round. When a round ends, you start the next one, repeating the 4 phases, and you continue doing this until the game ends in one of several possible ways. If you fill the threat track with collected art pieces, the game immediately ends, and the players all win. If any player loses their last health token, all the players lose. You also lose if you can't place a white hand agent or lost city marker because there are none left in the supply. Having none in the supply doesn't cause you to lose. Only once you have to place one, and there's none left there, that's when you lose. Finally, if this end tile is revealed from the deck, discard it, and if you are mid-draw, continue drawing as necessary. But at the end of the round, where this tile was revealed, if the players haven't collected all the required art pieces, they all lose. And don't forget, in addition to the different difficulty levels, there are 5 other maps you can play on, and each has its own unique rules and challenges as detailed here in their related sections of the rulebook. And you'll also find additional rules if you want to play solo. But all of those rules I'll leave for you to discover on your own. Otherwise, that's everything you need to know to play the art project. If you have any questions at all about anything you saw here, feel free to put them in the comments below, and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. You'll also find forums for discussion, pictures, other videos, and lots more over on the games page at Board Game Geek, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get notification anytime we post a new video. And if you'd like to support us directly, you can join our Patreon team, which I'll have linked below. But until next time, thanks for watching.